there, Space Cats! Ooh la la here, coming at you from Spaceport 9. Tonight I'm investigating reports that aliens have invaded and are forcing people to dance.
Out of all the games I played for this video, this was the one I was the most excited to try out beforehand. It wasn't as much because I like Space Jam 5, which I do, but more because I had an excuse to use my PlayStation VR again. VR as a gaming medium is very unique in its sense of immersion, which sounds like an obvious statement, like yeah, it's literally called virtual reality. But something about feeling that you're actually in the game world is so special. I mean, come on guys, I'll finally be able to meet Ulala. And what could be better?
That's not good.
This game comes to us thanks to Grounding Inc., who was formed by a director that previously worked with Sega. That's right, the guy who directed Panzer Dragoon? Wait, what? Yeah, the Space Channel 5 director seemed to have no involvement with this one, and neither did the Panzer Dragoon director either. Odd. They did bring back some game designers and artists based on what I could find, so key members did return for this game, which sadly didn't seem to be the case for many of the other games in this video, so I do appreciate that this one went the extra mile. First loading into the game, you end up in this cozy looking space pod with a very calming little song in the background, which I cannot find on YouTube, which bothers me greatly. There isn't too much going on here besides a window where you can see a ship fly by, but I like this room. It feels really immersive just being able to vibe in this little space pod before you get to the main game. In front of you there are multiple menu options, but for the sake of time I'm going to solely focus on the story mode. You start the game by scanning in your arms and it'll require your reporter attire, which is actually a full model instead of just being floating hands like most VR games, so that's pretty novel. Now naturally my first reaction to seeing something like this is to immediately try to mangle up the character model in a hilarious fashion, which probably proves why games like this don't usually use full models. After a quick tutorial with Lila, hey Lila, you get to play the first level of the game, which is a remake of the very first level of the original Space Channel 5, just all confined to the first area since you can't really move around a lot in VR. I will say it's really entertaining comparing the original dynamic camera angles of the intro to the opening cutscene of this game where you're just kind of standing around waiting for Lila to walk past you in order to start the level, but not quite close enough to touch. Darn those Sony sensors.
You missed the target.
Anyway, if you're familiar with how Space Jam 5 plays, then this game should be pretty self-explanatory. The opponent, which is most likely a Morian, will move in a direction with a pose, then you have to copy that pose using your two PlayStation Move controlled arms. The only real difference is that there are some added poses and dodging that add more variety to the movement. And since this is a VR game, there's going to be way more leeway in order to make the game more reasonably difficult for the player. There were more than a few instances where I probably should have lost a heart, but somehow the move counted. One thing that has definitely benefited by VR is the dodge move. Actually having to physically dodge attacks is so cool and encourages you to be active. At the same time, it makes the boss enemies way more terrifying, which I do think is a plus. This also doubles as the way to make you look hilarious to anyone else in the room, which I would say is a good feature.
Hey!
Moving on, as far as the story goes, if you're expecting there to be more in the like 10-second video clips that play between the different stages, then you will be very disappointed. Not that the game has no plot really, it's just that it's so minimal that it feels like it has no plot, which isn't much better to be honest. It's basically just a slightly altered retelling of the original Space Channel 5 story, except with like 1/4 of the actual content. After the opening mission of the game, you're greeted by a new variant of the crewmate, Morian, called the Evermoro, which is a white and red design that I think looks super good. The Evermoro are unique since they're actually able to speak to the player in English. Granted, it's only used for the sake of setting up a sick dab for the player to do. Which means that this VR spin-off game somehow adds more lore to the franchise than the entirety of Shenmue 3. Alright, I'll stop mentioning that game. After defeating the group, you move on to level 3, where you meet up with the Jaguars, who of course want to have a dance-off. So naturally, that's most of the level's gameplay. Well, you know, besides getting hit by an asteroid, which is way more terrifying than it might seem. At the end of the level, an alien spaceship that suspiciously looks like a fidget spinner starts to suck up Ulala on the player. And it's just this genuinely emotional moment where Ulala passes her microphone over before she gets overwhelmed by the void behind her. Ulala, no! She died. Honestly, it's just a good scene and probably the best part of the entire game. Although any emotional impact this would have is somewhat ruined since the level after this is the final level of the game. Not even kidding. Where you team up with Jaguar to save everyone using the power of dancing. Then after that, there are the credits where you get to high-five the cast members of the game, except for Ulala. I'm fine. Like I said earlier, this game's plot is pretty one note, all things considered. It's clear that the main focus of the game was just to be a VR tech demo rather than a full new entry to the series. Even with that being said, there only being 4 whole levels, which are very short mind you, does make this one hard to sell. It feels like right when the game is actually getting started, it just kind of ends. The original Space Jam 5 had 4 levels as well, but those were really long and difficult as hell, so it felt a lot more like a complete game, since it would most likely take a lot longer to finish. The game also switched locations in order to add a lot of variety, so this game being just 4 singular rooms forums really feels like a downgrade. My only guess as to why it was made this way is to prevent people from getting tired from playing each level for too long, but they could have just doubled the stage count in order to compensate for this. It also would have helped to fix the non-existent story, since the new Mororians are really unexplained at all. For a sequel that released a while after the previous game, this is a really huge disappointment, honestly. It takes roughly 30 minutes to beat the main story, so unless you're a hardcore Space Channel 5 fan already, then whether or not you'll get any value out of this entry will probably be very subjective. Personally, I had fun with the story mode since I already liked the previous game, so this felt like a fun addendum, but if you had never played one of these before, then I would imagine you would be even more confused by how little single player content there is. To the game's credit, there are some other modes you can try out, like a hard mode for some replay value, although I doubt most people would continue playing long enough to care. But the best mode in the game by far is the 100 stage dance battle mode, which is an endurance test that has you go through several different poses, and the goal is to try to remember each and keep up with it for the whole 100 stages. It gets fairly difficult, and is definitely the most replayable aspect of this game by far. It turns a little novelty game into a memory test, and honestly I think this is the real hook to playing the game. That being said, a lot of these poses are kind of a stretch, like the wolf and jaguar are almost identical. There are also two poses named after car brands, which is pretty amusing.
When I say Toyota, that's the pose. Toyota, is this car now? Toyota, 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 Toyota.
This mode is really fun, and that signature Space Channel 5 goofiness really carries the appeal of this mode so much further than it did in the story mode. As far as the era modes go, there is a model viewer that has descriptions of every character in the game, which they bother to give a unique description for each Mororian color, which is pretty amusing. Other than that, there is a viewing mode, which allows you to view each level as a bystander, so you can have that extra level of immersion to the gameplay.
Focus, focus.
Lastly, there's an arcade mode, which I think is mainly meant for competing with another player, but I don't really know what the purpose is overall. But the one main reason someone would care about arcade mode is for the Hatsune Miku DLC to release for $5. Yes, this is real. It's just a redo of the first level but with a dark aesthetic, and Miku is the host of Channel 39 and she gets to wear an Ula style outfit, which is honestly pretty amazing. The level isn't really anything to write home about, but it does add some time to the playthrough, and you do get the high-five Miku at the end, so that's pretty cool, I guess. Overall, Space Channel 5 VR may just be a glorified VR tech demo, but it's a tech demo I had fun with. Space Channel 5 is a great series, and VR is honestly such a good fit for it, and despite the pretty abysmal length of the story mode, I did not regret my $25 purchase in the slightest. I really hope that they continue to make more of these VR Space Channel 5 games, or any Space Channel 5 games for that matter, since I'd love to play more of them, just hopefully with significantly more content. I get the impression that the team behind these truly care about the IP, and you can tell even just by the visuals, which perfectly update the Dreamcast aesthetic while improving it to the standards of the hardware, to the point where it's pretty hard to tell the differences between what the two are from a glance. I really do want to give this game a higher score than I will, but the lack of content really hurts this one. But if you have a PlayStation VR, or any VR for that matter, then I can pretty safely recommend this one.
Alright, it's time to check out how you did today. Now let's take a look. Class B license. Decided to play it safe, huh? Come back next time and show us your best.